I was expecting a quiet birthday for my 36th. Nothing fancy, just a handful of close friends for a night in. But from the moment I opened the door to greet my first guest, that plan unraveled. A man I'd never seen before was standing there, gaunt and unkempt, and with an wary smile. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Happy birthday," he said, his voice rough as sandpaper. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, brushing past me with a familiarity that felt off, like he'd been here before. Before I could react, he disappeared into the living room, blending with a small crowd of familiar faces who were already mingling and sipping their drinks. I shook my head, trying to shake the feeling. Maybe a friend of a friend? But the nagging feeling only grew worse as the night continued. More guests arrived, all familiar faces, except for one more man unannounced. He seemed to slip in quietly, almost unnoticed, until I caught him at the corner of my eye. Tall, lean, with a scar running from his cheekbone to his chin, faint but unmistakable under the lights. There was something predatory in the way he watched the room, scanning every face before his gaze settled on me, unblinking. I found myself backing away instinctively as he approached. "Surprised to see me?" he asked. His voice smooth, but his expression unreadable. His words were casual, but his tone held an edge that made my skin crawl. "I'm sorry, have we met?" I managed to stammer. He tilted his head. "Oh, we have. I'm sure it'll come back to you soon enough." And with that, he melted back into the crowd, leaving me with a creeping sense of dread. The room filled quickly with laughter and clinking glasses, but I couldn't really ignore the fact that I was surrounded by some strangers. It was as though I was watching through a screen, everything muffled, distant. My close friends carried on, blissfully unaware of the newcomer's unsettling presence. I turned to my friend Dave and whispered, "Did you invite anyone I don't know?" He shrugged, flashing me a carefree grin. "Man, it's a party, just roll with it. The more, the merrier, right?" I tried to relax, but as I scanned the room, I realized something strange. All three of the newcomers had gathered by the window, whispering to each other with cold intensity. I caught bits of their conversation, something about the right time and finishing what was started. Then, as if on cue, the man with the scar raised his glass, commanding the room's attention. "A toast," he announced, his voice carrying a strange authority. "To our host, for welcoming us back into his life after all these years." The room went silent as everyone raised their glasses, but I was skeptical and at the same time terrified. His gaze lingered on me, that same unnerving smile stretching across his face. I forced a smile and took a sip, my mind in all sorts of mess. Back? I didn't know them, did I? Trying to shake off the moment, I moved to the bar, pouring myself a strong drink. I felt a presence beside me, and turned to find one of the women watching me. Her face was vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place her. She leaned in close, a sickly sweet smile on her lips. "How's your mother these days?" she asked, her tone feigned sympathy. I stood still. My mother had passed away 5 years ago, something I'd only shared with close friends. The room felt suddenly cold, and a hollow feeling sank in my chest. "She passed away," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh," she replied, her smile widening. "I know. I just wanted to see how much you'd remember." Before I could ask what she meant, she slipped back into the crowd, leaving me more unsettled than before. The evening grew stranger as I began to notice details that I probably overlooked before. On the mantel where my family photo had been was a small old photograph. I picked it up and my stomach tightened. It was me, but younger, with a group of faces I barely remembered from a different life, a rough time I'd worked hard to leave behind. But the faces in the photograph were unmistakably those of the strangers who had appeared tonight. It was from a night years ago, a party I barely remembered. One that had ended in whispers and accusations, friendships shattered. I'd walked away, leaving them all behind. And now somehow they were here. I moved quickly through the room, cornering the man with the scar in the hallway. I grabbed his arm, my voice barely concealing the panic. "What's going on? Why are you here?" He looked down at my hand on his arm, then back up. "Don't play innocent. We've got unfinished business." Before I could respond, he wrenched his arm free and slipped back into the crowd, disappearing as easily as he'd arrived. As the night wore on, I grew more paranoid. I started noticing subtle signs everywhere. One of the women wore a silver pendant identical to one my sister had owned before it disappeared, and another man had a scar on his arm, a mark from a night that was better left unspoken. When I approached her with a low tone, I asked, "Where did you get that pendant?" She looked at me with mocking innocence. "You don't remember. You're the one who took it from her." I recoiled, the memory hitting me hard. I'd taken the pendant years ago. Spiteful act during a fight I regretted almost immediately. I thought I'd thrown it away. But here it was, a reminder of a night I'd tried to erase. By now, my guest had picked up on the tension. Dave, noticing my pale face, pulled me aside. "Are you okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." "They're not supposed to be here," I whispered, my voice shaky. He raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. "Who?" Before I could respond, the woman with a pendant called out. "To our host, who thought he could leave us all behind without consequences." Every eye in the room turned to me, and I suddenly felt exposed. A trickle of sweat ran down my forehead as she continued, her voice like a blade. "Did you really think you could forget us?" Each of the strangers stepped forward, taking turns speaking, recounting moments I'd tried to bury, lies I'd told, betrayals I'd committed, things I'd taken without remorse. One by one, they threw my own sins back at me, each one a reminder of the person I'd been. The guests I knew grew increasingly uncomfortable, some backing away, others whispering among themselves. My closest friends watched in horror as my past unfurled before them. I felt naked. I couldn't escape. They blocked every door, every window. Their faces twisted in anger, betrayal, and something darker. I stumbled back, my voice breaking as I tried to deny it all. "I've changed," I pleaded. "I'm not the same person." But the gaunt man only shook his head. "You can't change the past, and we're here to make sure you remember that." After a turbulent year, all I wanted for my birthday was a quiet escape with Alice. Our relationship had been strained, but I figured some time away in a remote cabin would ease things. Besides, I'd been thinking of proposing, just needed the right moment. The cabin was nestled in a secluded part of the mountains, far from the nearest town. Alice was quiet on the drive up, her gaze distant, fixed on the winding road ahead. I tried to lighten the mood, talking about hiking trails and how peaceful it would be to disconnect. She nodded, forcing a smile, and back to her distant gazing. We arrived in the late afternoon. The air was crisp, the cabin cozy, but an odd tension too. I brushed it off, assuming I was just nervous about proposing. That night, after a simple dinner by the fire, Alice surprised me with a small, carefully wrapped box. "Happy birthday," she said. Her voice soft, but her expression unsettlingly serious. I unwrapped it, expecting something typical, a book or maybe a gadget. But what lay inside was a lock of blonde hair, tied with a neat ribbon. It caught me off guard. My heart skipped a beat. Alice's hair was dark. This wasn't hers. "Do you recognize it?" she asked. Her tone sweet, but with a steely undertone. The only face that came to mind was Claire, a woman from my past, blonde and carefree, who'd vanished years ago. I'd never told Alice about her, nor about the secrets I'd buried. Yet here I was, holding a piece of that past in my hands, unable to fathom how she'd known. "Alice, what is this?" Her smile tightened, eyes glinting with something cold. "It's a reminder," she whispered, watching me intently. I managed a weak laugh, pretending it was some kind of elaborate joke, but my pulse thundered in my ears. The cabin felt smaller, the air so thick it was hard to breathe. I couldn't sleep that night, haunted by memories I thought I'd long buried. I tossed and turned, replaying every detail of that lock of hair, wondering how Alice could have possibly known. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen, where Alice was making coffee. On the table was a small envelope with my name scrawled on the front. I glanced at Alice, but she was pouring coffee as if it were nothing. I opened it and was shell-struck. Inside was a photograph of me and Claire, taken on the day she disappeared. She was smiling, her arm around my shoulder, oblivious to the fact it would be the last picture taken of her. Alice's voice broke my thoughts. "Good picture, isn't it?" she said, a sharp edge in her tone. I swallowed, feeling my stomach churn. "Where did you get this?" She shrugged, sipping her coffee. "I know a lot more than you think, love." The image felt like a slap, a reminder of things I tried to forget. I wanted to confront her, to demand how she'd found it, but something about her calmness was deeply unnerving. Throughout the day, more gifts started appearing around the cabin. A bracelet I'd once given Claire, now resting on the nightstand. An old, worn-out letter she'd written, tucked between the pages of a book. Even an earring I recognized as hers, placed carefully in the bathroom sink. Each item was a punch to my gut, dragging me back to memories I tried to erase. By the time evening fell, I was on edge, my nerves frayed. I couldn't take it any longer. After dinner, I stood up and faced Alice. "What is this? Some sick game?" She looked up from her plate, feigning innocence. "What do you mean?" "These things. The hair, the photograph, her bracelet. Where did you find them?" Alice leaned back, studying me with a smirk. "You think you can just walk away from your past without consequence?" Her words hit me like a physical blow. All this time she'd known about Claire, and she was making sure I couldn't forget. That night, I couldn't sleep again. The cabin felt oppressive, every sound amplified in the silence. I got up, creeping through the darkened rooms, only to find Alice standing by the window, her silhouette outlined by the moonlight. She didn't turn when I approached. "Claire was a good person," she said softly. "She didn't deserve what happened." My pulse quickening. "What? What do you know?" Alice finally turned, her expression a twisted combination of pity and fury. "I know you lied to me. I know what you did to her, and now you're going to pay for it." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she didn't understand, but her stare left no room for denial. She wasn't looking for an apology. She wanted me to suffer. The following morning, I found yet another item on the kitchen table, a letter written in my own handwriting. My own words, confessing everything that had happened that night with Claire. It was a letter I'd written to myself years ago in a moment of guilt, one I destroyed, or thought I had. My hands shook as I read it. Every detail was there, raw and ugly. Alice must have found it somehow, piecing together the truth bit by bit, weaponizing my own words against me. Alice appeared, watching me as I read. Her face was devoid of any warmth, any sympathy. She'd made her decision. "Do you know what it's like to live with someone who hides so much?" she whispered. "To love someone who's capable of such cruelty?" I felt my voice catch. "Alice, please." But she was unmoved. "No, you don't get to beg now. Not after what you did." Desperation clawed at me. I pleaded, tried to explain that I was young and foolish back then, that Claire's disappearance had been an accident. But Alice's stare was unyielding. "Accident," she repeated, laughing bitterly. "I think you forget. I've read everything you left behind. And I know it wasn't just an accident." A lump formed in my throat. I could feel the noose tightening around me. She knew far more than I'd ever imagined. Panicked, I grabbed my coat and tried to leave, my mind only on escape. But Alice blocked the door, her face twisted with fury. "You're not going anywhere," she said, her voice low and deadly. We stood there, locked in a silent standoff. I knew that if I didn't find a way out, I'd be at her mercy. Her plan was clear. She wanted me to suffer, to feel the weight of my guilt as each gift chipped away at my sanity. The air felt thick with tension as I backed away, trapped with no clear way out. And as the memories of my past sins closed in around me, I realized there was no escape. Not from the cabin, not from Alice, and certainly not from the truth. My plan was simple, a night to celebrate my last birthday before the big 4-0. A quiet evening at home with a few friends, nothing extravagant. I didn't expect much, a few drinks, laughs, maybe even a toast to aging gracefully. So when a red envelope with my name handwritten in neat, looping script arrived in the mail, I assumed it was from someone playing along with the birthday festivities. But the return address was blank, and inside was nothing but a red card that simply read, "The game begins tonight." I stared at the card, bemused. My friends were always trying to outdo each other with pranks, so I tossed it aside, figuring someone was gearing up for an elaborate birthday surprise. But the more I thought about it, the more the card nagged at me. Who would leave something like that without a hint of their identity? By the time the first guest, Lena, arrived, I'd nearly forgotten the card. But she had one in her hand, too, the same looping handwriting on the front, only this time it read, "Welcome, Player 1." I laughed, chalking it up to the friends who loved to get into character, but Lena looked uneasy. "You sent this, right?" she asked, her voice uncertain as she glanced at the card again. I shook my head, laughing it off, figuring it was just the opening act of some clever birthday game. As the night wore on, more friends arrived, each with their own red envelope, each card addressed to a different player, Player 2, Player 3, and so on. No one knew where the cards came from, and their expressions varied from amusement to suspicion. Soon, everyone was murmuring about the strange game and the cards. By the time Dan, my last friend, showed up with his card that read, "Final Player," the sense of unease had grown. We were all crowded around the table, the red cards lying between us like clues waiting to be pieced together. There were 6 cards in total, and everyone had received one, except for me. I went back to my card, lying alone on the counter, and turned it over. In small writing on the back, a new message had appeared since I last looked at it. "Your turn is last." I laughed, trying to play it off. "All right, everyone, I guess the game's on. Who wants a drink?" As I turned to grab glasses, a new red card had mysteriously appeared on the table, a fresh card with a single word: "Begin." Silence hung heavy in the air as we read the new card. The game was on, it seemed, and none of us knew who had started it. Everyone exchanged uneasy glances, waiting for someone to break the silence. Lena finally did, reading the small text on the card aloud. To start, each player must answer a question. Truthfully, I rolled my eyes, laughing a little too loudly. All right, this is just some kind of birthday version of Truth or Dare, right? But no one laughed. They all looked uneasy, waiting to see who would go first. A red card slid mysteriously across the table toward Dan, and he picked it up. The question written on it was simple. "What is your greatest regret?" Dan swallowed, looking around the room as though seeking permission. "Well, I'd say not telling my dad how much he meant to me before he passed," he said, voice soft and raw. We all murmured sympathetically, the mood suddenly somber. But before he could say anything else, another card slid across the table, stopping in front of Lena. She picked it up with visible reluctance. Her question read, "Who do you trust the least in this room?" Her eyes darted to each of us before landing back on the card. "Honestly, I think probably, maybe Tom." She glanced at Tom, offering a weak smile, but the air was thick with tension. Tom just looked at her, expression unreadable. As each friend's turn came, the questions grew darker, probing into secrets they'd never intended to share. My stomach knotted with each reveal. Tom admitted to stealing from his company, Karen confessed to an affair, and Lena's face went pale as she revealed a hidden debt. Each answer seemed to bring the mood lower, eroding the comfort and trust we'd once shared. And with each answer, a new red card would appear, as if summoned by our secrets. Finally, it was my turn. The card slid smoothly across the table to me. I hesitated before picking it up. The question was written in the same script. "What did you do that you've never forgiven yourself for?" My pulse quickened as the memory flashed in my mind, one I'd worked so hard to bury. I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze, the air thick with anticipation. I struggled to find words, hesitating. But the game had no mercy for cowards, and so I forced myself to speak. "I was the reason my brother died," I finally said, voice barely a whisper. The room was silent. My friends stared, shocked. I'd never told anyone that before, and their shocked expressions made it clear they had no idea. But the worst part was that the room seemed to grow colder with every reveal unfolding. The next card appeared in the middle of the table. To continue, a sacrifice must be made. We all stared at it, horrified. What does that mean? Karen asked. No one had an answer. Just then, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. I scrambled for my phone, but it wouldn't turn on. Cold sweat broke out over me. When the lights came back on, another red card was on the table, different from the others. This one was worn, its edges frayed, as though it had been passed down many hands. It read, "Choose a player to leave the room." Fear spread across everyone's face as we looked at one another. It's just a prank, right? I tried to convince myself, my voice cracking slightly, but no one volunteered. Finally, Tom stood up. All right, I'll go. Maybe this whole thing will end if we play along. He walked to the door, glancing over his shoulder one last time before stepping out. The door clicked shut, and a new card appeared on the table. Another player must now confess. The night wore on, and with each turn, the questions grew more sinister, prying deeper into our darkest secrets, our most hidden fears. Each confession seemed to tighten an invisible noose around us, and each sacrifice left the remaining players even more vulnerable. As dawn approached, it was clear we were down to only 2 players, me and Lena. My hand shook as I reached for what I hoped was the final card. It simply read, "Only one leaves." Lena looked at me, eyes wide with terror. "What does it mean?" she whispered. I had no answer. Desperation took hold, and we bolted for the door together, frantically trying the lock, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were nailed shut, and no amount of force would break them. Then, with a sound like static, a single voice crackled through my phone speaker, now suddenly alive again. It was a voice I recognized, a voice from my childhood. My brothers. "You have to choose, or the game never ends." Lena's face was pale, her breath coming in short gasps as she backed away from me, and I felt the weight of it all, the red card still in my hand. My brother's voice lingering in my ear, his demand like an anchor pulling me down. I looked at Lena, and for a moment we both understood the choice we had to make. In the end, one of us would walk out of that room, but neither of us would ever be free from the memory of that terrible night. The game had taken what it came for, and I was left alone in the empty silence, haunted by the ghost of my own choices, clutching a red card that promised I'd never really leave.